All right, welcome back, everyone. If you're joining us today, you are probably looking for a clear, direct breakdown of the law, and I promise you that is exactly what we're going to deliver. Today, we're diving into the Bill of Rights. Now, I really don't want you to think of this as just some dusty old document locked away in a government archive somewhere. No, this is an active, living shield. It is literally the very thing protecting our everyday liberties. So let's jump right into this explainer and see exactly how this shield works out there in the real world. Here is our roadmap for today. We are going to decode 4 fascinating case studies: banning the general warrant, the private search exception, limits on stop and frisk, and finally, proof beyond reasonable doubt. Okay, let's kick things off with Section 1, the constitutional shield. To truly appreciate why these laws matter, we first kind of have to understand the natural tension in any society between the immense power of the state and, well, us, the vulnerable individuals. I want you to really think about this for a second. What actually stands between you and the absolute power of the government? If we didn't have safeguards, what's to stop arbitrary arrests or authorities just kicking down your door in the middle of the night? The answer, of course, is the Constitution. Let's look at how this plays out in a real case. Moving right along to Section 2, banning the general warrant. So, back in 1967, there was this landmark case, Stonehill versus Diokno. And this wasn't just some minor dispute. We are talking about a massive corporate raid. The authorities managed to secure 42 separate search warrants against a man named Harry Stonehill. But here's the catch. These warrants were completely weaponized, just to fish for evidence. They merely alleged these really abstract violations of central bank and tariff laws, but they didn't point to one specific criminal act. They literally ordered the blanket seizure of all business transactions. The Supreme Court ended up striking them down, basically saying, look, a warrant has to particularly describe the things to be seized based on a very specific offense. You absolutely cannot just go fishing in someone's private records. The court's ruling included this incredibly powerful statement. They said that the right to privacy cannot be revocable at the whim of any police officer. You know, your home, your private papers, your personal effects, they are your castle, and they are completely protected from the arbitrary whims of government officials who maybe just have a hunch. And this ruling brilliantly illustrates the birth of a super vital concept in Philippine law, the exclusionary rule. You might have heard it called the fruit of the poisonous tree. It essentially mandates that any evidence obtained illegally is entirely inadmissible in court. The court basically threw out older rules to ensure one strict, unbending standard: the state cannot and will not profit from its own unlawful tactics. Simply put, if the search is illegal, the evidence gets thrown out. Period.
All right, Section 3, the private search exception.
But what happens when the person snooping through your stuff isn't actually a police officer? Picture the setup from the case of People versus Marty. A guy named Andre Marty goes to a packing forwarder in Manila. He's trying to ship 4 gift-wrapped packages all the way to Zurich, claiming they're just full of books and cigars. But the shipping proprietor, a private citizen named Job Reyes, is just following his standard operating procedure. He opens the boxes, smells this kind of peculiar odor, and boom, discovers dried marijuana leaves hidden inside, so he immediately calls the National Bureau of Investigation. Now, this brings up a highly practical question for our daily lives, doesn't it? If a private delivery worker opens your package, finds something illegal, and hands it straight to the cops, can that evidence actually be used against you in court? Remember that exclusionary rule we just talked about. Does it apply in a situation like this? Well, here is the crucial distinction you need to know. A state or police search requires a strict warrant, so they don't violate the Constitution. But a private citizen search, that yields perfectly admissible evidence. Why? Because the Bill of Rights is a shield specifically against the government. Those constitutional protections against unreasonable searches only apply to the state, not to private individuals who are just acting on their own. Since Job Reyes was just a private proprietor inspecting packages for his own business, the marijuana was completely admissible, and Markini was ultimately convicted. Which brings us to Section 4. Limits on stop and frisk. Let's transition from shipping boxes back to the busy streets of Manila with the case of Malacat versus CA. Let's trace the timeline that actually led to Sammy Malacat's arrest. So tension was super high. On August 20th, 1990, bomb threats were reported near Plaza Miranda. A few days later, on the 25th, police supposedly chased a group trying to detonate a grenade. Fast forward to August 27th, police officers spot Sammy Malacat just standing near a drugstore, and their main reason for approaching him: they claimed his eyes were moving very fast. Based on that alone, they search him, they claim they found a grenade tucked in his waist, and they arrest him without a warrant. Now, to understand why this specific arrest was incredibly problematic, we've got to look at the extremely strict rules for a valid warrantless arrest. You basically only have three narrow windows here. Number one, in flagrante delicto, which basically means you are caught red-handed right in the act. Number two, hot pursuit, meaning a crime literally just happened and the police are actively chasing you. And three, catching an escaped prisoner. Notice how incredibly high the bar is set before they can take away someone's freedom without a judge getting involved. Which really forces us to ask this critical, rhetorical question: is looking suspicious a crime? I mean, if you're just standing on a street corner and your eyes are darting around a bit, does the state actually have the right to just grab you and search your body? Well, the Supreme Court said absolutely not. This Plaza Miranda stop and frisk completely failed the legal test. Malakat was literally just standing there. There was zero overt physical act indicating he was committing a crime. Having fast-moving eyes alone definitely does not establish probable cause. The arresting officer didn't have any personal knowledge of a crime being committed right then, and crucially, the cops admitted there wasn't even a visible bulge to suggest he had a concealed weapon. The Supreme Court ruled that a mere suspicion or a gut feeling is never enough. Sami Malakat was acquitted. Finally, let's look at Section 5, Proof Beyond Reasonable Doubt. For our final case study, People v. Dramayo, the stakes are raised to the absolute highest level in a pretty gruesome murder trial. A man named Atillo Nogaliza unfortunately witnessed a robbery, and because of what he saw, he was ambushed and brutally killed just to silence him. The prosecution ended up charging 7 men with conspiracy. Now, obviously, it's a horrific crime, and the public desire for justice is intense, but the law requires the scales of justice to demand absolute moral certainty before condemning anyone. So, the Supreme Court meticulously applied this standard to all 7 accused. Let's look at how it shook out. 2 of the men actually turned state witness and were granted immunity. Another 2 men were convicted, and that's because there was direct, undeniable evidence that they plotted the killing and struck the fatal blows. But here is the wild part. 3 of the accused walked free. Why? Because the evidence against them simply didn't survive that test of moral certainty. One guy maintained he was out at sea fishing, and the prosecution just didn't have the rock-solid proof to place him at the murder scene beyond a reasonable doubt. The court relied on this profound, foundational principle of our entire legal system. They stated that it is better to acquit a man upon the ground of reasonable doubt, even if, in reality, he might secretly be guilty, than to throw an innocent person in a penitentiary for the rest of their life. An accusation is not synonymous with guilt. The presumption of innocence really is the ultimate anchor of the justice system. So let's pull all of this together. From those massive corporate fishing expeditions in Stonehill, to the private snooping in Marty, the street-level police stops in Malakat, and the absolute demand for proof in Dramayo, we see a really clear picture. Your constitutional rights are definitely not just passive words on a piece of paper. They are an active, daily shield against overreach. But as we've seen, that shield requires constant vigilance. It requires courts that are willing to enforce it, and citizens like you who actually understand it. Which leaves us with one final thought to ponder today. We all want a safe society with effective law enforcement, for sure. But we also desperately want our homes, our privacy, and our individual liberties protected. So how will you help protect that delicate balance? Understanding the rules of the game is definitely the first step. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep learning, stay focused out there, and I will see you in the next one.